First, we're going to go right now and talk with Craig Hulet. Craig, thanks for joining me this evening.
Certainly, thank you.
For those of our listeners just tuning in, Craig was both speechwriter and special assistant for special projects to Congressman Jack Metcalf. He has been a consultant to federal law enforcement, the ATF&E and Justice, Homeland Security now for 25 years. He remains a paid analyst and consultant in various areas of geopolitical, business, and security issues, terrorism, and military affairs. Craig, with what's going on, 2 nights now of severe issues starting up in Missouri with this shooting, and stories like this cropping up almost weekly with video footage of police officers in brutal situations. What do you make of these stories, and what's going on right now?
Well, I have a client list. I call them colleagues more than clients, and they send me material on different topics on a regular basis. They pay me to do the research. I don't pay them to do the research. But when they send me the material, one of my clients has made a practice of sending me, on every occasion, any kind of police brutality, police shooting dogs, police abusing their rights, people's rights on the street on a regular basis. And it is happening every week, you're correct. But even some pretty severe things, like a flashbang was used recently in a home raid. They got the wrong house, but the flashbang ended up in a crib on the chest of a 1-year-old child. So there's been some pretty bad things going on in law enforcement at the local level on a regular basis, starting with the fact that the ACLU documented that SWAT teams have been used now in the last decade, a 4,000% increase for everything from subpoenas to issuing simple summons to law enforcement agencies bringing SWAT teams in to bust people, being investigated by the EPA or the Department of Education, National Park Service, just ridiculous things. And all these law agencies have now created law enforcement within the ranks of these otherwise benign departments of the government. Now, that's one reason we need to look at. The other reason you had mentioned earlier when you were talking to the other fellow before you came to me, there has been a change. In the 30 years that I've been a consultant to federal law enforcement, I've also been close to state and local, mostly sheriff's departments in many different states, 7 to be exact. And in every case where I've asked and questioned, why has the police brutality increased on a regular basis exponentially over the years? Why is the use of SWAT teams being used in cases that shouldn't be used? And I've gotten the same answer from everybody in every department, from the guys I've worked with for 30 years. The quality of personnel that are being hired and the directives from those people that are being promoted in the last 2 decades is a lot different than, I don't know if you're familiar with the TV show Blue Bloods, that it's about the old school way of law enforcement, the protect and serve, the guys that would join the police department because they cared about their community. That's a dead letter. Very few people are joining law enforcement now for that reason. It's simply an entry-level job. They can't get a job anywhere else, or it's a career move, and they have plans to use law enforcement to get into private security and something else. So the quality of personnel has dropped off considerably. That's the one thing that I think bothers me the most about what's going on, like what's going on right now in the news. I think it was predictable. Every city in every state just about has seen a young man gunned down who didn't have a weapon, shot 8, 10, 16, sometimes as many as 32 rounds by 10 different officers. Because, again, these guys are scared to death to be on the beat. They're afraid all the time. The old school cops that I'm familiar with, the guys I worked with, I swear, they were never afraid. It's like they were lacking that component in them of fear. They were confident men, and they did the job. These people out there, they're scared to death. They think everybody's out to get them, and they just want to get home, and they're afraid. And when you're afraid, that's not a good mix for law enforcement.
Well, and I've personally, I grew up in a family of law enforcement officials. I have many friends throughout the United States that are also working with the law, and we know that there are plenty of good people out there doing this job and serving, protecting, putting their life on the line on a daily basis for us. And there are a few bad apples that pop up in every department that seem to be taking things a little too far. You said that you think it's the quality of the candidates that they're bringing into this. Do you believe it's the quality, or do you believe it's the lack of training and preparation that they're truly giving to these men who might go into it with the best of intentions to go out, serve, protect, and take care of their community? And as you said, the fear takes over because everybody's got weapons, and some horrible, very powerful weapons that, can cut through police flak jackets without, a second thought now. Is that more of what's going on?
Well, actually, in the cases that we've watched over the last decade, nobody's gunning down cops with AK-47s. That's just not happening. It's very rare that anything like that happens. Law enforcement have been targeted by some sovereign citizens and groups like that, but those are the rare occasions. The problem with the training is a problem that's across the board. Look at Detroit for the worst-case scenario. Almost every county in America, everybody is feeling the pinch, from the financial crisis to the housing bubble. The economy is in shambles, and right here where I live, I know the SWAT team out here where I live. In fact, one of the sheriffs that's the head of it, an instructor now, used to come to my house for dinner and probably too much scotch on occasion, and we got to know each other very well. Well, they don't even train any longer. They've simply cut out training because they no longer have the money. And when they start letting people go, there's no real rule of thumb that when you let people go, you let go of the poorest officers. Sometimes it can be the better officers that get let go because it's a bureaucracy. And the training has dropped off. That is a problem. But these are all the kinds of problems that should be addressed without a sheriff's department purchasing for free, just for maintenance, military equipment like MRAPs that are decommissioned from Baghdad and brought into a small rural community. Why does a rural sheriff's department need MRAPs and RPGs? They've even ordered grenades and grenade launchers. They're talking about arming drones. These aren't conspiracy theories. Seattle, where I'm very close to, has an armed drone, and people are protesting it. What we're seeing happening right now in Ferguson is a response to this constant deluge every day in the press where somebody is being killed that shouldn't have been killed by law enforcement. In fact, there was just a protest by thousands of citizens. Unfortunately, I can't remember the city. It was either Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, because of how many dogs have been shot by law enforcement officers for no reason. They were just simply serving a subpoena or serving a warrant, and rather than dealing with the dog where a trained officer, a reasonable officer would, they're shooting these dogs right and left across the country, and people are getting fed up with it. So there's a lot wrong, but at the root of all of it, I'm going to tell you the root of all of it, this country can't live with a $17 trillion debt and a $3 trillion deficit. We can't keep borrowing. The economy is in shambles, and 90 million Americans are permanently unemployed. We can't keep going in this direction and not expect law enforcement to misbehave on a daily basis because of what's going on out there in the streets. The economy, the culture, we are falling apart. Nobody can ignore it any longer.
Craig, that brings up two different points, too, when we discuss this. I mean, first of all, do you believe that there really is a rise in this violent culture, or is it just the rise of social media, the rise of everybody having a camera phone on them, and even the police having the cameras that are capturing this violence more? Do you really think it's happening more now, or has it always gone on?
Yeah, it is increasing exponentially. The fact that we're seeing more of it because of the internet and video cameras and stuff, that's part of the natural culture. But the ACLU study was a very to-the-point study. The increase in the use of SWAT teams just to serve misdemeanor warrants and, agencies like the Department of Agriculture, Department of Education, Energy, even the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration now all have armed agents and full SWAT teams that are executing warrants on crimes that were otherwise conceived and looked at as civil offenses. They were just civil offenses. They're treating them. For instance, there was an incident where the SWAT team was brought in to raid a house, and they were after a piece of coral, because the National Department of Interior and Commerce, working with National Oceanographic, they felt that this coral was illegal, to have possession of it, that the owner of it might have purchased it. Turns out it was legal. She had paperwork for it. She was fined $500, but a SWAT team was used, a military, full-blown SWAT team. This is unnecessary. Now, there is a theory, not from the ACLU, but those of us with different experience, with Congress, with federal law enforcement. I do believe we're getting desensitized to the use of police force on a much more aggressive scale because the federal government is I'm going to say rightly, they should be, and I think rightly so, they are worried about civil disturbances in the future, and even the Pentagon has now been brought into it. In fact, I got a document that I've just now published. It's a Department of Defense directive, number 3025.18, authorizing the Pentagon to take over federal law enforcement and federal, state, and local law enforcement, with or without the president's approval, to defend federal property, federal agencies, federal employees, because of a fear of civil disturbances. And the Pentagon is drafting a protocol right now using 300 different universities to respond to what they feel is the citizenry getting angry because of either an economic collapse, food lines, enormous layoffs. Governments plan for the future. They always do. In fact, I just mentioned to your producer, I get paid to do this, and I have been for 30 years. But I'm going to be honest with you. There's 1,000 guys out there paid better than me that work for the federal, state, and local governments, and they're smarter than me. They are planning for the day when the American people get fed up with the way things are and might conceivably hit the streets in larger numbers than what's happening in Ferguson over a teenager being shot. There are bigger issues the federal government knows has to be handled, and they have to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. And unfortunately, they're talking about you and I. They're talking about the average citizen being fed up, not terrorist groups. This isn't a plan for terrorism. It's a plan for civil disturbances.
We've got about a minute left together here, Craig. I appreciate you spending some time with us. Do you think that there's something, too, with overtaxing the police departments and the law enforcement officials? We're letting illegal aliens in, kind of the don't ask, don't tell. We're allowing this to go on. I know there was a startling article that came out a few weeks back talking about, was it around 7,000 to 8,000 murders and homicides have been now attributed to illegal aliens in our country committing these murders. And you know, if we're allowing more people in, you were talking about the money problems and everything that's going on, and we just continue to let people come in and suckle off the country, is this going to just continue to cause more of a collapse?
Well, I don't know that it's going to cause more of a collapse. I think it's part of the problem of who's in charge inside the Beltway. And I'm not talking about Obama. I'm talking about every administration going back to the Reagan administration.
Craig Hulet, thank you so much for joining us.